Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. Alright friends, so once again, let's have a conversation we've had before. The media went on and on for 4 years telling us about the rise in hate crimes.
The president's language, his rhetoric, has produced the kinds of hate crimes that we saw in El Paso yesterday, but we've been seeing across this country. They've been on the rise for each one of the last 3 years. So
an atmosphere of hate has been developing in this country over the last few years. A lot of it is emanating from Washington, and it's having an effect on all of us.
Wait, so you're saying you're blaming the president by saying
Not
it's coming
just the
from
president.
Washington?
Let me be really clear about something. The only reason Jussie Smollett thought he could take advantage of a hoax about a hate crime is for the environment, the toxic environment that Donald Trump created.
It was Donald Trump's fault, of course. The insurrection, Donald Trump's fault. Hate crimes, Donald Trump's fault. Everything bad, the COVID-19, Donald Trump's fault. Police brutality, Donald Trump's fault. Everything was Donald Trump's fault for the 4 years that he was in office. And even now, as he's just chilling in Mar-a-Lago in Florida, still, somehow, everything's his fault. Even Joe Biden keeps telling us how inflation is Donald Trump's fault. And they always make this point that his rhetoric leads to violence. His rhetoric leads to violence. But I'm still sitting here waiting for a leftoid to answer my challenge. I've issued various different challenges to leftoids, telling them, please give me one actual example of right-wing violence, of right-wing ultra-mega violence and extremism that can be directly connected to Donald Trump's rhetoric. And as I always say, the only example that leftoids have is the whole Jussie Smollett incident and the whole "this is MAGA country" meme. There's not a single example. Well, here's another example of left-wing violence, of an actual hate crime, directly connecting left-wing rhetoric. The man yelled left-wing rhetoric as he committed a hate crime, an undeniable hate crime that police are confirming, targeting a white man in California. So let's really have a conversation about hate crimes and violent rhetoric, or rhetoric that leads to violence. Let's really have a conversation about which side is adding fuel to the fire and causing all of the societal damage and division that we're seeing in the modern era. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. All right, folks, take a look at this from the Blaze Media. White privilege slurs shouted as suspect ran over ER doctor riding his bike and then inserted a pointy object in him to death. A California accountant is in custody on a murder charge after he allegedly ran over a doctor in a crosswalk and then inserted a pointy, sharp metal object into the man until the man was no longer living. Around 3 p.m. on Wednesday, Michael Mamone, a 58-year-old emergency medicine physician, was riding his bike through the intersection of Pacific Coast Highway and Crown Valley Parkway in Dana Point, along the southern coast of California between Laguna Beach and San Clemente. As Mamone headed north through the crosswalk on his bike, a driver in a white Lexus suddenly careened into him, sending him soaring into the air and then crashing into the middle of the intersection. At that point, the suspect, identified later as 39-year-old Van Roy Evans Smith, exited his vehicle and then approached the victim, who was severely injured. According to a press release from the Orange County Sheriff's Department, Smith then assaulted Mamone with a sharp, pointy object. Surveillance footage captured by a camera at a nearby home shows the incident unfold. Though Mamone and his bike are difficult to see in the crosswalk, the collision itself and much of the aftermath is clear. Now, obviously, we can't play that clip on YouTube. I'm sure a lot of you guys can picture what happened and probably don't even want to watch the clip, but let's just say I watched it and it's absolutely horrific. And here is where things get messed up. The homeowner whose camera captured the footage reported that the initial crash sounded like a gunshot. When she went outside to investigate, she claimed that she heard the suspect yell racial slurs about white privilege as he attacked the victim. Other witnesses claimed that Smith had also been wielding a BB gun, though those reports have not been confirmed. The pointy, sharp object used in the attack was recovered at the scene, police said. So it's the perfect comparison, the perfect contrast. You have the Jussie Smollett incident, which received national to worldwide coverage every single friggin' night, and which was tied to Donald Trump directly, a totally faked hate crime that was obviously extremely suspect, extremely fake from the start. Jussie Smollett still had the noose around his neck as police officers met him at his own apartment, and he had light little bruising and a tiny little mark on his face. Two MAGA hat wearing individuals at 2 o'clock in the morning assaulted him on his way to Subway in downtown Chicago in the freezing cold. Totally believable. The media didn't ask any questions, ran with the story, tied it to Donald Trump, pushed the whole "this is MAGA country" nonsense, gave Jussie Smollett that primetime slot every single night. Now we have an incident, not just a simple racially motivated assault, but a violent homicide, a homicidal maniac targeting just a random civilian riding his bike down the street, ranting about white privilege and all kinds of other nonsense as he takes that individual's life. And again, I'm looking around like I'm freaking John Travolta. Where's the national coverage? Where's the worldwide coverage? What's going on? Where are the news outlets covering this story? I can't find it anywhere. It's been more than 24 hours since this happened, since it was reported on local news outlets, and it has zero mainstream recognition, zero national recognition, let alone worldwide. Nobody seems to care. When violent hate crimes target white people, no one cares. When white people are the target of police brutality, no one cares. When white people are the target of mass casualty events, nobody really seems to care past maybe a day in the news cycle, because leftists can push their gun control narrative. But in terms of the racial narrative, nobody cares. They purposely ignore it. Like I've previously stated, it seems almost as if it's open season on Trump supporters, open season on white people. You can do and say whatever you want. Outside of the police department doing their investigation, nobody cares. But if the left wing, and of course the left-wing mainstream media, was being intellectually honest, if they had any integrity, then this would be the #1 story, because this is what they're always going on about. They're always talking about political extremism. They're talking about hate crimes. They're talking about political rhetoric and ideological rhetoric leading to acts of violence. The men literally yelled the left's favorite catchphrase, "Mo white privilege," as he took a white person's life in a racially motivated hate crime. This is the perfect story. This is exactly what they're talking about. This is what they keep warning us about. Except the only difference is that it's flipped on its head. The narrative gets flipped on its head. And it's like this for every single situation. They talk about white on black violence, that white people are hateful, violent, and that there's an epidemic of violence targeting black people from the white community. It doesn't exist. In fact, FBI statistics and crime statistics show the exact opposite. The same thing with that badge, the same thing with police officers. They tell you there's an epidemic of unarmed black men that are being targeted violently by white officers. But if you actually look at the statistics, it almost never happens. In fact, there's more police officers who are losing their lives while serving their communities on the front lines, being the target of vicious assaults and losing their life while just trying to do their job. It's the opposite of what they tell you. And it's the same thing here when it comes to hate crimes. They go on and on about mass casualty events. It's all white people's fault. It's the angry white man, they always say. But they only present the cases when it's angry white men. The last, I think, 4 mass casualty events, the perpetrator hasn't been a white individual. And so the story just poof vanishes from the mainstream media. Hate crimes targeting Asian people. Hashtag stop Asian hate. Find me a single example where the perpetrator of the hate crime was white. I'm sure there's a couple, but for the most part, the totality, it tends to be different racial groups. But the media tries to pin that narrative on Trump supporters. That's exactly what they did.
President Trump calling it the China virus and the Kung flu and all of that, which apparently it unleashed this kind of targeted hate crimes against Asian Americans.
Today, we find that there have been nearly 3,800 anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents in just the year alone. They were stoked by the words of former President Donald Trump
on what we're doing to address the over 3,800 reported hate incidents and crimes that have occurred throughout this past year. Incidents and tragedies that have occurred because the former president and the Republican Party put a target on the backs of Asian Americans everywhere.
It's Donald Trump's fault because of his rhetoric on the COOF in China. Doesn't exactly look like Trump supporters committing these acts of violence on the streets of New York and Los Angeles, now does it? And that's simply because it's not. Left-wing rhetoric, however, is leading to violence. You know why? You know how we know that? Because a man in California just lost his life to a homicidal maniac screaming and ranting and rambling about white privilege. And that seems to me like left-wing rhetoric involved in a heinous act of violence. doesn't it? Once again, we have an example and they don't. We're not the problem when it comes to this divisive political world and landscape and cultural world that we live in. You know, Donald Trump was elected and they kept saying how Donald Trump was divisive. But who was really divisive? Was it Donald Trump who was trying to run for president and implement his agenda and his policies? Or was it the mainstream media and the left-wing activists who are attacking people verbally, launching ad hominem attacks, telling you that you're irredeemable, that you're a deplorable if you support Donald Trump, assaulting people on the streets for simply having a Make America Great Again hat? Was it the Trump derangement syndrome sufferers who are making life insufferable? People dropping family members because they voted for Donald Trump? Was it them? Or was it people who just want low taxes and more freedom? And maybe spending American taxpayer dollars on Americans rather than foreigners? Every single time we see the truth. Trump supporters aren't the crazed maniacs causing all of this division, assaulting people in the streets, endorsing acts of political extremism and violence. It's always the left. It's Antifa. It's the people who support Antifa. They tell you reverse racism is just a right-wing myth as they peddle anti-white rhetoric, as they try to push it on your kids with CRT and other woke anti-white educational curriculums. It's hard to call it educational, but you get the point. They've injected hate into society. It's metastasizing and it's now materializing in actual acts of violence targeting white people. There you go, mainstream media. Here's your example of a racially motivated hate crime, which has a direct connection to political rhetoric, but I'm sure you're gonna ignore it because it doesn't fit your precious anti-Trump narrative. That's what I got for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.